what I'm really interested in, Tommy, and I think it's really important to have this conversation properly, right, is you talk about the fact that you're a very smart guy, I can tell. Very smart. We've sat across from some of the most intelligent people in the world. You're a smart guy, right? But you were not educated. You just had experiences when you were growing up. Is that fair to say, right?
That's fair to say.
So you know this, you've seen that, you've seen this happen to your cousin. All of these things are going on. You experience things. But then, and this is where I really want to hear your opinion, right? Is you started to actually study. You started to look at Islam. You read the Quran. You tried to understand the scriptural part of all of this, right? And this is really where I think a lot of the conversation is now at, which is about Islam and the West, compatibility. Why is it that things are becoming more tense? Why is it that thing you talk about, how when Muslims fight non-Muslims, even your Muslim friends will join them rather than you, right? So what is it that you've learned and what is it that you believe about Islam? Can you explain that part to people?
Yeah, so 2010, it's the Quran. 2010, I'm in jail. I'm doing 22 weeks of solitary confinement at that point. Yeah.
For what?
For illegally entering America.
Right,
Stupid move.
Yeah.
Do you know what it was? I'll tell you the truth. I sort of like lived my life where I think if you worry about consequence, you're never going to bring about change. And I wanted change. Yeah. So I felt at that time in 2000, I went to America 2009 or 10. I was detained at JFK and deported. And I thought, no, I've got an important message to give America. And so I went again on a friend's passport. I got in. Yeah, I got in and I gave a speech called A Warning to America. And what I've always said is I wish someone come to my town 30 years ago and said, listen, this is what's going to happen unless you stop it. So I went to America knowing what I was doing was wrong, knowing it was risky. I thought I'd end up in jail in America, but I didn't. I got detained here when I got back and I spent 22 weeks on solitary confinement. Now, a Muslim outreach...
Mate, you know what? You're f***ing insane. You know that?
Yeah.
Like, from what I've seen of American prison, that is not a place you want to go to voluntarily.
No, but you know, crazily, I thought at the time, remember, we began the English Defence League, I'm a deep thinker, yeah?
Yeah.
I believe this country's in danger. And
I agree with
I believe my children are in danger. And I believe the enjoyment and freedoms we've all had are going to be eroded and taken, and the kids won't have them. And this is far bigger than me or my kids. This is about a generation of our kids. And I believe that. And I've believed it since growing up.
I agree with you.
So when this was starting...
What do you mean by freedoms, by the way?
I mean that the ability to speak, because they just curtail and suppress, and it suits the government as well. So they create the problem a lot of the time, which they're doing. And I think maybe I've played my part in that role where they want us all clashing with each other. Because as we're clashing with each other, we're not looking at them. And they want everyone separated into gay, straight, black, white, BLM, this group, that group. You're all warring with each other. And whilst you're warring with each other, they're implementing so many laws that you're not even listening about. And all those laws are going to curtail and prohibit your speech and your ability to even have discussions on any of these issues. And the reason being that most of the issues are coming from the government. It's their failure. It's all their problems. I don't blame Muslims for coming here. I don't blame Muslims in the UK for wanting Sharia law because this tells them to want it. Yeah? So I don't blame them.
Well, let's come back to that, right? So you go to America, you because you thought you had an important message.
Yep.
I
spent 2 days in New York. If I knew I was going to do 22 weeks in solitary confinement, I'd spent a few months touring, wouldn't I? Yeah. I spent 2 days. I got 22 weeks in solitary. Whilst I'm in there, I get sent a Quran by Muslims, and to try and convert me. So I take the Quran. I think, right, I've got a lot of time on my hands here. Let's have a look at this book. Right? Now, I don't know how many people know this, but the Quran is not in chronological order. I didn't know this. So one thing Muhammad says one day is next to something he says 20 years later. So for you to try and, any of us to try and make sense, it's like what the Christians used to do. They wanted everyone illiterate so they could control the population. Yeah? The Quran is like an encrypted war manual that you can't make sense of. Yeah? And it's important that you can make sense of it because abrogation in Islam means whatever Muhammad says later in his life supersedes what he says earlier. So if there's two contradictory verses, if he says love the Jews and then later he says kill the Jews, then which one did he say later? Yeah? This one matters. This prohibits this one. So they give me the Quran. And then I thought, right, let me make a few points here. Do not be friends with Christians or Jews. And I challenge anyone to do this. Pick up a Quran and go through and make reference to the verses that tell you not to be friends with Christians or Jews. And I started writing these verses and I had pages of them. And I was like, it was like a jigsaw just fell into place. Everything I've seen growing up, the Muslim playground, the Muslim dinner tool, the friends who side with them, well, they're taught from a little age. Supremacy, they're taught not to be friends with us. They can't be friends with us. 70% of this book talks about us, how they need to treat us. So as I'm reading it, I started making sense of it. And that was and I didn't stop after that, if I'm honest. I didn't stop learning. And then when I got out of jail, I thought, right, many people watching this probably just think Jesus is like Muhammad. Muhammad is like Jesus. Two prophets, two alleged prophets. Right, they're nothing like each other. Because I took the biography of Muhammad by Ibn Ishaq. So I like to go to the sources, the most recognised and renowned sources in the Islamic world. So again, not Tommy Robinson's opinion. This is not my story. This is the Islamic scholars of history, the best ones there are, of their life of Muhammad. So I started reading Life of Muhammad. And I read it, a Jewish tribe surrender. And this is why it's important, so people understand how important scripture is. Do you remember the Peshawar school attacks?
I don't know.
In Pakistan. So the Taliban, or Al-Qaeda, one of the two, they attacked a school and there was outrage about it. But what they did when they attacked school is they pulled the pants down of all the kids. And anyone who started puberty was killed and beheaded. And anyone who hadn't was sacrificed as war booty, yeah? Well, that's exactly what Muhammad did. This is why the scripture is important. So the Jewish tribe surrender. Now, when they surrender, Muhammad tortures Kanana, he's the leader of the Jewish tribe, setting fire to his stomach to rob his gold. What sort of prophet is this? I'm thinking, what sort of man is this? Jesus says turn the other cheek. Muhammad's torturing and burning people and robbing them, yeah? So he's robbing them, and then after robbing them, he takes that night, Sophia, so any Muslims, and when I have this conversation with Muslims, they don't even know about this, half of them, yeah? I said, he took the man's wife that night and married her. Now here's the two different worldviews. I see that as raping the man's wife that night. Other Muslims have said, well, no, he saved her from a life of slavery, from all the other men raping her, because he took her. He was actually really good because he saved her. It's like, what? But anyway, he beheads these people, he does this, and I started going through his life, and he walks past another Muslim at another point, and this is all in scripture, and he says, have you derobed her? He's on about another slave. I said, no, give her here. So then I started understanding, and I started finding verses in here, there's 4, that say, outside of the 4 wives, what Muhammad tells you is you can take non-Muslim women as sexual slaves, yeah? And you're one of the verses says you're actually blameless. So I think, well, Rotherham, Telford, all these towns and cities, are they taking non-Muslim women as sexual slaves? Now, this is not confusing. Boko Haram's leader, when they took the girls in Nigeria, come out and said, Muhammad has commanded us to do this. Well, he has. Read the scripture. Yeah? Al-Qaeda, ISIS, what did they do to the Yazidi? This is not made up. There's not 30, 40 different terrorist groups all singing off the same hymn sheet. Yeah, this is a problem. And again, it's great that the majority of Muslims don't read this and take it literally. That's great. But the problem's coming from this. And I tried to have this conversation with Piers Morgan. We get onto him. I tried to have this conversation. So what I've done, so as I learned more, I then learned about Islam, I learned about Muhammad. I think we need to understand who Muhammad was. Yeah? If we've got 4 million British Muslims now who think Muhammad was perfect, and Muhammad married a 6-year-old girl when she was 9, we're going to have a problem. If Muhammad beheaded and took sexual slaves, we're going to have a problem. If Muhammad taught all this, in the Quran, 7% of Mein Kampf is Jew hatred. 7%. 11% of that book. Mein Kampf is banned. This isn't banned, this is taught across the whole country. Now, you're not even allowed to have this conversation. And the Labour government...
you are.
Yeah.
We're having this conversation.
We're having it, but Labour government want to bring in Islamophobia laws that would prevent us even having this conversation.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you say you allowed it. We've come a long way.
You are now.
Yeah.
This is fair. Look, and this is why I wanted to ask you about this, Tommy, because I don't know exactly what I think about it. I just want to hear your opinion because you've been talking about this for a very long time. And I think you have been, I was going to say demonized, and I think it's probably the correct term. You have been demonized for talking about it. But I also think as the nature of what has been happening in this country is coming out, that I know, just speaking to lots of people, these are people who are not going to be on the streets in a riot. These are people who are sitting in TV studios and they're doing, you know, comedy and they're doing journalism and they're doing politics and none of them will ever say anything publicly. But there are a lot of people now who are going, you know what, Tommy's been saying a lot of things that have been proven correct. So that's just where we're at. People can pretend that's not happening. That is what's happening, right? But what I'm trying to understand is what it is that you're saying, because one of the things that I don't understand, genuinely don't understand, is where we go from here, right? What is it that you think we ought to do? Because what you're saying, correct me if any of this is not your view, right? What you're really saying is Islamic doctrine is divisive and hateful towards non-Muslims, and it is about domination, right?
And it's incompatible with Western freedom and democracy.
And it's incompatible with Western freedom and democracy. which is where I think a lot of people's concern with that message is, for the simple reason of like, well, what do we do?
That's the point.
Is that a fair question?
If we accept this, if you accept we're right, what the hell are you going to do?
Right.
Because you've got 4 million Muslims here.
Yeah.
So what are you going to do? And not just got 4 million Muslims, but you've got Saudi and Qatar own half the capital city. The money is embedded in the nation. Qatar has spent £750 million. Qatar that houses Hamas. Qatar have spent £750 million radicalising Muslims across Europe. They've messed up the whole of France. Yeah?
To be fair, Tommy, Qatar and Saudi are two very different states.
They are, because Saudi under the new king are actually coming quite progressive and actually trying to deal with some of these
and the UAE,
and the UAE.
So this is
the UAE. Yeah.
This is another part of the discussion, which is really, I think, really important. And you keep saying that, and I think it's important to emphasize. I've come back from Uzbekistan a couple of months ago, and I grew up in Uzbekistan, Soviet Muslim country, right? They don't have a problem with this. They don't have grooming gangs. They don't have extremists. The extremists they have all leave because they make life intolerable for them, right? UAE, Saudi Arabia, a lot of Muslim countries are actually much better at dealing with Islamic extremism than we are, right?
Yeah, there's a reason for that as well. There's a reason for that. So UAE, Saudi, they ban all these extremist groups. Muslim Brotherhood, not allowed to operate. We actually give home to these groups because it supported British foreign policy. With the war in Afghanistan, with the Soviet, we wanted a mujahideen. Yeah. We funded the mujahideen.
The Americans did.
The Americans and us. Yeah. We gave home to their leaders in Europe. We allowed them to grow, foster, and all of a sudden, Boris Johnson, put it on here. This is Boris Johnson. Remember this is Boris Johnson before 7/7. Yeah? Remember what it says in the Holy Quran. Slay the unbelievers wherever you can find them. We will perform jihad against the kuffar, the unbelievers. That was in Boris Johnson's book, 72 Virgins. So he knows what Islam is. Right. But then when he comes in power, he totally pretends he doesn't. He fully gets it. Yeah. And why does he do that? So there's many that understand it. And Boris Johnson's one of them. Yeah. But he's a coward, and he took a different line. So when we say, what are we going to do? And most of these countries come down hard, but we didn't. We gave home. The Muslim Brotherhood have got offices in our capital cities. It's like they wouldn't be allowed to operate in the UAE or Saudi Arabia.
No.
Now, Saudi Arabia understand that you can't give any homage to Hezbollah, Hamas, these terrorist groups. And look at what's happened in Iran. But I think most people in our country need to understand how quickly a country can change. Look what happened to Iran under the Ayatollah. Look at the Islamic Revolution. They went from freedom-loving
women walking around miniskirts.
And I remember there's videos of them laughing in halls when they say women will have to wear a hijab. Yeah, well, now you get killed if you don't. Yeah? And that happened quick.
So the question always is,
what do we do?
What do we do? Because as you say, there are lots of Muslims in this country who are great. Like the stereotypical grooming gang perpetrator is like a taxi driver, right? I've said this before.
מעניין מה יהיה הפתרון, זה קטע מאוד מעניין. והלוואי שטומי רובינסון יהיה ראש ממשלת בריטניה. ואז יהיה שינוי.
The taxi driver that drives my wife and son around when they need to go somewhere is an Afghan man. I would trust no one more than him to take care of my wife and son because they're really good people. Middle-class family, wonderful people, right? So there are millions of Muslims in this country actually who are not in any way a threat or a problem, right? Is that fair?
That's fair, but there's millions that are. Here's the problem.
I don't know. Well, you think there's millions of Muslims?
23% want Sharia law in this country. It's well over 1 million that are a problem. They need to leave.
Okay.
I would say how much of this is culture? Like we know, for instance, with the grooming gangs, the vast majority of them come from a very specific region in Pakistan. And Kashmir. So how much of that is a cultural issue and how much of that is Islam? Because we also need to separate that.
Well, there's lots of Sikhs in this country that come from Kashmir. They're not raping kids.
But there's also Omanis and Saudis in this country are not raping kids either.
They're not. But if you look at the gangs, and I've done the demographics of the gangs, Somali, Afghani, Iraqi, yes, the vast majority are Pakistani, the vast majority, because the vast majority of Muslims in the UK are Pakistani. That's it. Now, if we look at, it's Moroccans who are doing it in Holland. There was a film called Loverboy created in 2007, and our pathetic country didn't allow it to be played in our schools. They clamped down because it was racist, yeah? Now, that film was an educational film to be played to children to educate them on the Loverboy techniques. Grooming, right? 2007, how many kids could have been saved? But because of racism, and if we just rewind a little bit, just to make one clarification. When I set up the English Defence League, as a street protest movement on the street, what would you want? Because we had a lesbian and gay division, we had a Jewish division, we had a Hindu division. We made it very clear of who we were and what our mission statement was. Do you know the Scotland Yard have a Metropolitan Domestic Extremism Unit? And the head of that unit come out and made a statement saying the English Defence League are not far right. So although everyone now believes the English Defence League was a far right movement, that's because the media told you 10,000 times it was far right. So it becomes far right, same as me.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. Yeah? There were problems with it. It attracted the brave and the strange and the dangerous at times. But fast forward to where we are, what do we do if you accept this problem and that's this where the government just buried their head? And what do we do? Well, you need to start addressing it. You really need to address it. And what we're seeing now, the swing across the whole of Europe, I've been saying it for years. When the cat's out of the bag, which it is now, the bubbles burst, the dam's broke. Yeah, the country's awake. Everyone can see it. It's not. This ain't going away. Yeah. So to keep on what Keir Starmer tried to do after the riots after Southport, which again people talk about. You know, like you said, there was a worry about me because there's an element of violence at times. That's just me defending myself. If you listen to my message, do you know after Lee Rigby's attack, after Lee Rigby beheaded someone, I stood to 10,000 English Defence League supporters in Newcastle. My speech said, there's 600 Muslims serving in the British Armed Forces. They're doing a hell of a lot more for this country than we are. Yeah. If you abuse a Muslim woman walking down the street, you're a coward. You smash up a mosque, you're a fucking moron. Yeah. So my message has always been this. Yeah. Now that doesn't excuse that there's been problems because there's a level of aggression and anger in this country which has been simmered and underneath and boiling for decades. And at times it's come up. So how do you do that? You need to harness it and channel it. When the riots went in Southport, I made it very clear. I made videos, and the reason why I made videos is because I was worried for those young men. Yeah, because I understand their anger. Because 20 years ago, I put on a balaclava. Yeah, I run through the streets of Luton. So I get what you're doing, but there's a better way than that. Yeah, and
which is what?
Which is, so I remember making a video saying, where are the men? Get those kids' masks off their faces because they're all kids. When I was watching the trouble going on, they're just young kids. They're going to ruin their whole lives. They're going to get put in jail, and they're angry. I believe they are justifiably angry. Yeah, that's what I believe. That level of anger. If we look at where the protests were, Hull, is it Hull or Hartlepool? Hartlepool or Hull, one of them. A Muslim man in the hotel left the hotel and stabbed a pensioner to death for Gaza. Yeah, I don't even know if people know about this. Yeah, in a terrorist attack. He was in the hotel. There were trouble outside that hotel during the riots. Of course there was. There was trouble outside the hotel in Tamworth during the riots because Mohammed left the hotel and raped an English woman who was walking home. Of course there was. There's been 8 Muslim migrants in hotels who have women. There's been 25 sexually assaults against kids from migrants in hotels. This week, there's been a 12-year-old two men, Afghanis. There's been the attack in Warwickshire. There's been the sexual assault in Epping. And I challenge anyone to do this.
Some of those cases, we have to say for your benefit,
allegedly.
Tommy. Allegedly. I wouldn't like you to go to prison for something you said on here. Just for people who don't understand British libel law, you have to say that until someone's been found guilty.
Until they've been proven guilty, yeah.
Right.
But there's been do you know, Afghan, they put Libyan forces in a military base. They raped 2 men. They raped 2 men. Yeah. Now, all this is going on, right? We know it's going on. Everyone who lives in these towns and cities knows it's going on. The difference is this used to be confined to Luton,
right?
And towns like Luton. Yeah. Not anymore. It's in your village.
So just there's a lot of the stuff you've just mentioned there that we've talked about ad nauseum on the show. Okay. A lot, right? As you know, I'm first-generation immigrant myself. I think illegal immigration is completely unacceptable and just shouldn't be happening. There shouldn't be boats coming over the channel. They should be turned around and taken back to France. Like, none of this should be happening. We shouldn't be putting people up in hotels at the taxpayers' expense. We should be, if you want to have asylum, you process them outside of the country.
They could stop that like that.
Of course they could. And I think it's a balls problem. It's not, we don't know how to do it. We don't have the balls to do it, right?
Yeah. But they will have the balls when they see the public opinion.
Exactly. But what I'm asking you is, for example, you mentioned 23% of Muslims in this country watch Sharia law, and you said they need to go, right? So what are you saying? If someone believes in Sharia law, we have to deport them?
If someone wants to overthrow the democracy of this nation and replace it with a violent ideology, we need to deal with it. And most of these people, say for example, there's 40,000 British Muslims or Muslims on a terrorist watch list.
Right.
40,000. Yeah? Out of that 40,000, I think 50% of them hold dual nationality. And they've got to go. Why are we following them?
I agree. Yeah.
There's 3,000 of that 40,000 who are monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at a cost of £9 billion a year. Now, as the demographic changes, as the demographic changes in this country, we could deal with these problems when it was 1 or 2% Muslim population. Yeah. If we get forward to where we're at now, 6-7%, and we look at the projected growth forecast of the Islamic community, when we get to 25%, for example, well, that 40,000 is going to double or treble. That's an army. Yeah. That's a problem. How do we afford it? Say Pakistani Muslims make up 3% of the British population. They're responsible for 33% of child defects. you know how much that costs?
Due to cousin marriage.
Due to cousin marriage. 76% of Muslims in Bradford, Pakistani Muslims, marry their cousin. How much is that costing? Why are we tolerating this nonsense? Because Muhammad married his cousin. But I don't care what Muhammad done 1400 years ago. You're in Britain. Sort it out. We're not paying for it anymore. Yeah? Well, our country's struggling. Our people are struggling. Our own people on the streets. They're homeless. They're hungry. They can't heat their homes. And whilst this is all going on, you're spending how much on hotels of who? Men who are culturally impossible to integrate or assimilate into this country. And that's just, and that's not being, and do you know what's mad here? Which I think needs to come out is Abu Hili.
הם לא באו להשתלב בבריטניה, בתרבות הבריטנית, הם באו לכפות את התרבות שלהם על בריטניה.
Abu Halima. Sorry, Abu, I'm going to talk about you. Abu Halima was on the documentary called The Jihadi Next Door. Yeah? He's one of the country's most biggest jihadi terrorists. After the Salman Abedi attack in Manchester, I started looking at Manchester. And I saw the Muslim population went from 25,000 to 50,000 in 10 years. The next 10 years it went from 50,000 to 100,000. What's going to happen 10 years later? Yeah? Another 10 years. Manchester's gone. That's the reality of it. We are walking into a ticking time bomb and no one's addressing it. No one's talking about it. Nigel Farage even said, I'm not bothered about demographic change. You need to be, mate. Yeah, you need to be. Because as these problems progress and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, how do we deal with it? But anyway, Abu Halima, so I'm messaging him. I get a message just before I'm going to jail when I was arrested on terrorism charges, which I've got a court case coming up for. And he messages saying, Tommy, been watching what's going on with you. Do you want to know what's happening? I said, who's that? He goes, Abu Halima, do you remember me? You come to my house. So after the terrorist attack with Salman Abedi, I looked up the country's most feared terrorists, or the biggest jihadists. And I thought, right, where are they? So I went to Abu Halima's house in Northampton. He's 4 doors up from a school. So if he wants to get a knife, bear in mind what they've just done, if he wants to, no one's stopping him. He's next door to the school. Whose kids are in that school? They're ours. Not Amber Rudd's at the time. Was it not Amber Heard? Or Amber Rudd? It was Home Secretary, sorry.
Definitely not Amber Heard.
No,
Yeah.
so, she was Home Secretary. Yeah. Her kids ain't in that school. Yeah. Ours are, yeah. So I went to his school, police come, and so he said, do you remember you come to my house, Tommy? So I replied saying, are you still a little jihadi, are you? And he said, no, I'm not, Tommy. Yeah? And it surprised me. I said, what do you mean you're not? He said, I'm still a Muslim. I don't believe any of that madness anymore. Right, and I went, okay. He goes, what they're going to do with you now under terrorism legislation is what they've done with all of us. So we've all been silenced. We're not allowed to talk. We're not allowed to do this, blah, blah, blah. So I'm going back and forward with him in this conversation, trying to get a sit down with him like this so the public can hear this conversation. He said, do you know the biggest threat to Britain, Tommy? I said, what? He said, the boat people. This is the country's biggest jihadist. He's telling me the boat people. He said, well, what's happening to British people's houses? What's happening to the British people born here? So I think so many people from immigrant background and even Islamic background are looking at what's going on going, what the hell is going on? What the hell is going on? Everyone's too scared to talk about it. And the government, Keir Starmer, so when the riots happened, as soon as they mentioned English Defence League, bearing in mind I left English Defence League in 2015, it's been redundant since then. There's no English Defence League. I saw Sadiq Khan talking about it this week. It's like, mate, it's been gone a decade. What are you talking about? You're trying to dig up this old ghost, right? And you dig it up for your own political benefit. And the reason being that rather than Keir Starmer and the Labour government say people are angry in every town and city, which is it Friday today? No?
Thursday.
So tomorrow I know there's 14 protests in different cities. Yeah, it's coming. Okay, this problem's not going away for the governments. So as this is going on, Keir Starmer, rather than say the public are angry, far-right English Defence League, everyone's a racist, and not just that, what we're going to do is we're going to get the courts and we're going to scare the hell out of you. And they thought it would work, and it didn't work, did it? Because people are coming back. So when people say about me and my element, I have held 3 huge rallies now called Unite the Kingdom. I learned a lot. Leading the English Defence League, held 80 national demonstrations. I learn when there's problems. I'll be honest, there's demonstrations going on this Friday night. I don't think that's a good idea. I wouldn't organise a demonstration on Friday night. Yeah? You're going to get people drinking. You're going to get people when it turns dark. If you look at all the demonstrations we organise, they're early, they're away from pubs, and we make sure it's over at an early time to stop these elements. And the reason being, the government want that. They want you wearing a mask. Take off your mask. Don't wear a balaclava. Because what you do by doing that, if you allow it, which we don't allow, if you allow that, you're allowing infiltration. When those riots happened last Southport, if you look at the Sunderland riot, where they burnt the police station, it's 10 men wearing fully black. I'm telling you,